You're listening to Tonebenders, the Sound Designers Podcast. Let's do this.
Hey everybody, welcome to Tonebenders. My name is Tim Muirhead, and sitting beside me for the first time in 100 and whatever many episodes we've done is René Coronado. How you doing, René?
Hey, what's up?
It's nice to see you in person.
It's a little weird.
Yeah, you're taller than I expected, and I find it a little intimidating, I'm going to be honest with you. And also sitting with us, we have the one and only Tom Hammond. Tom has over 150 credits on his IMDb page, but he's arguably best known for his collaborations with director Richard Linklater, including Boyhood, the trilogy of Before Sunrise, Before Sunset and Before Midnight, Bernie, A Scanner Darkly, and the recent Where'd You Go, Bernadette. They've collaborated on over 11 films over 25 years. In addition, he has built the fantastic Soundcrafter Studios, which we're sitting in right now. We just got a tour. This really impressive place. Thanks for having us here.
Thanks.
And welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Well, thanks for taking an interest in what we do here.
Well, thanks for making some really awesome projects that we can talk about. It's really great. So before you were working with Richard Linklater, you had a lot of credits working, doing Foley editing. Mm-hmm. So was that in LA or?
That was in Los Angeles. Yeah. I was mostly working for Dane Davis at Dane Tracks. And I knew Dane from film school at California Institute of the Arts.
So you went to film school together?
I went, right.
And so how did you work your way out to Austin then?
Well, my wife, Janice, got a teaching job here at UT. So she was working at the LA County Museum of Art, and she was sort of through with being a curator. She wanted to do teaching, so she dragged me here. And at first, you know, I was ready to leave, actually, Foley. I'd been sort of pigeonholed into doing just that. And I thought, well, you know, there's a lot of other things that I was interested in. I was, you know, in my 30s. I thought, okay, Pro Tools has advanced to the point that I could actually buy a system, and Dane had just gotten some systems, and his wife, Francine, went to UT out here, and so she was interested in what would happen out here. So I bought a system with Janice actually helped me buy it. She took some of her retirement money and her pension, and we put $22,000 into it.
What year was this?
And this was 93.
Okay.
And moved out here. It was also because of our son, who was 3 years old. We were looking at, you know, schools, and so it was a big deal. We moved here,
Yeah.
And when the movers came with the equipment, I just set it up and started working, cutting Foley. Dane would send the picture on a 3/4-inch tape. I would program it and send back the sheets. FedEx them back to the Foley stage, the Foley artists. They would record it on usually like a 35 millimeter or multi-track, and then Dane would take it over to his studio and transfer it onto Datadat backup tapes, those little teeny little tapes, and they would FedEx that to me. I would open the files and cut it, and when I was done, I would just send back through a phone modem the Pro Tools file. So Pro Tools then only had 4 voices. Mm-hmm. So you could only, it was very primitive.
This is Pro Tools like 1, wasn't it?
Oh, I think it was Pro Tools 3.
3, yeah.
I feel like I started in 99 and I was on Pro Tools 3.1 and we didn't have stereo tracks then.
No, stereo tracks didn't come in until 5 maybe?
Right.
Yeah,
So,
I'm trying to picture Pro Tools in 93.
yes, well, it quickly just sort of evolved, you know, as with each year Pro Tools would add more things.
Yeah.
And I evolved with it. You know, I was just an editor. So as the mixing capabilities were added, I added that to what I was able to do. But so for a number of features, the first features that I did, or I was just doing, you know, working for Dane, and I remember, you know, Dane calling him up and saying, "Look, I'm going to send this file," and he would have to get on. Because it was just basically modem to modem through a phone line.
Was it like when you had to like put the phone, like the handset on a device that would make noises into the device and then
Yeah. So that was just the session file because he already had
That was just the session
audio.
file. So there was no like adding an audio suite file. I don't think Pro Tools had that then. So
you could only move it on the timeline.
Right,
That's all you could do.
which was very similar to the way we worked with 35 because I was using a Moviola, And all we were doing was just cutting out pieces of film and just arranging it so that it was in sync. So moving to Pro Tools with 4 voices was not really that much different. It's then when we started adding volume and EQ, and then things took off.
So that was 93 that you moved back to Austin. And 95 is when Before Sunrise came out.
Right. So
it must have been pretty soon after you moved back that you started working on that.
Well, within the first year there, we moved in September, I got involved with the filmmakers here. The first one was Kim Hinkle. He was directing his Chainsaw 4 film. And
Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Yeah. This is the one with Matthew McConaughey and René Zellweger.
Yes.
And they had finished cutting it, and they were looking at doing their sound. And they decided that first of all, they asked Richard Linklater. They asked him, because Rick had just finished Dazed and Confused, and they'd mixed it at Universal in L.A. So they were just getting some info. They said, how should we do the sound? And Rick said, well, talk to Tricia, my sister. She's over at Dane Tracks. Well, I knew Tricia from Dane Tracks. I'd been there many years. She sort of came in at the end. But she turned around and said, hey, Tom's out there in Austin. Why don't you see what he can do for you? So I immediately got to know, well, first of all, Sandra Dare, who is also Richard Linklater's picture editor, she was cutting Chainsaw 4.
Chainsaw, okay.
So, and she knew sort of all the people involved with Dazed and Confused and Chainsaw. And with Dazed and Confused, they had used Larry Sire to do some tent mixes. Larry was a music mixer. Okay. So here's another thing about Austin. With all this music capability, there was sort of a system set up to do mixing for film. So, and this ADAT system had just come out, which was shall we explain?
Yeah,
we should explain.
The ADAT, there were 2 ADAT systems. The other one was a DA88, which is a smaller tape, but the ADAT was actually a VHS tape.
Yep.
But it was a clever system, and you can still, like the optical plugs, some of them are called ADAT plugs.
Yeah,
so that's
for sure.
That's some of the legacy of this ADAT system. But you could link these decks together.
So they each had 8 tracks.
Right, each had 8 tracks. You could link them together, and they were all run by time code. So as long as you could get the audio onto the tape and keep it running for a while.
Yeah. ADATs were notoriously finicky.
Yeah, you could imagine. All of a sudden it would just eat the tape, or it would start rolling, and this tape would be coming out the front of them. So
very cartoon style.
And then people start running down the hall.
So with Larry's help, Stan Ginsel, who dealt with the technical part of it, we got a lot of those ADATs from Ray Benson, who's in his studio. He's a musician here in town, and Wing Tyler, who had a studio at his house in South Austin. We decided we could do it, and we convinced Kim and Robert Kuhn, his producer, that we could do it here. And I'm like going.
So did you have a physical space at this time to do it in, or were you doing it
for editing?
For
I
anything?
just had a loft in a house that we were renting in South Austin. So how did we do it?
Yes.
Well, I had the connection to Dane Tracks, so all the people there brought them in to help. So the crew that I've been working with for many years took on cutting. Dane did Matthew McConaughey has this leg which makes all these hydraulic sounds, and Dane actually cut that. Dane actually ended up cutting the dialogue because we were having problems with that. Was one thing that was done here, and it was done on a Moviola, and it was just not working. So we actually took those tracks, gave it to Dane. He recut it, and he actually told me, because things were pretty light then. He said he was thinking of just sort of getting out of sound at the time, because he was all real interested in photography. And he said, well, that job sort of kept me going. Subsequently, Dane
went on to do The Matrix.
Yeah,
and,
right.
Yeah, so it changed just about everything.
Right. Many years later, after he had done The Matrix, he came out to visit us here in Austin, and he and Francine and with their kids, or his youngest at the time. And they could see there really wasn't much of a system set. It was basically just me and a couple other people. So he had made a good amount on the Matrix series, so he was able to build this wonderful studio that he had there in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. So
I'm going to tell you a story about when I went to college. Mm-hmm. I went to film school, mm-hmm. and I started in film school in 1995. Mm-hmm. So Pulp Fiction had come out the year before in 94, mm-hmm. and Before Sunrise came out like right as we were starting college.
Right.
And basically, at the end of that year, all of our first-year student films fell right down in line with one of those two films. Mm-hmm. And so like the year split in half between the people who wanted to make these Richard Linklater films and the people who wanted to make the Quentin Tarantino film.
Right,
now, I fell in the Linklater side.
Okay.
But it was in really, those two movies for my exact age and year going to film school were like the movies that we talked about. And I have a very clear memory, I'm making up words now, very clear memory of after seeing Before Sunrise, going to a coffee shop with all my friends afterwards, and we shut the coffee shop down because we just talked about it. What's mm-hmm. this mean? And like, mm-hmm. and like that was a very seminal maybe movie for my personal film history. And then since then, I've been a huge Richard Linklater fan, mm-hmm. and. Like, to talk to you about some of the things on how you worked on some of these films is really interesting to me because his movies, well, I guess Scanner Darkly and Waking Life are pretty kind of high-tech films mm-hmm. for what they are. Mm-hmm. But a lot of his films aren't, shoot-'em-up car chase scene movies. Right. But the sound has to set a mood in those movies. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering how you went about finding the mood for each of his films.
Mm-hmm. Like the first film, mm-hmm. Before Sunrise, it was the first time working with Rick. So we got an introduction to what his feelings were about things. And Rick first of all, these are dialogue stories. Mm-hmm. And yes, the sound all needs to be there, but it needs to be very real. And one of the things that he didn't like was having sounds that weren't part of really what the story was or what was happening on screen. So if there was a dog bark and there was no dog there, why is there a dog bark? Mm-hmm. We don't need that. So that was the first clue.
It seems like a challenge as you're building backgrounds, though, doesn't it?
Yeah. So, but if you just think that way, okay, so here is a scene with on a street like Vienna, and there's lots of traffic and there's trolley cars and things. Those are all fine. So let's try to make this thing as real as possible as if we're walking down the street. And trains. Trains are, I was telling you just about Plow, one of his first films. He's on the train. Rick likes trains. Well, first of all, if you look at Rick's films, they're all about time mm-hmm. and traveling. A lot of them have to do with traveling somewhere. So the train, we want to make it very real. We want to see and hear. We want to hear what's related to what's happening outside. So when you're going down a bridge, you want to hear those big beams passing by, so there's little whooshes there. Mm-hmm. That also goes with his cars. When you're driving in a convertible like in Scanner Darkly, there's lots of stuff moving by, so you want to have that shifting. And but on the other hand, these are just sort of techniques that I just sort of established doing with his films. I mean, every film that I've done with his, there's always a scene like in a car. And what I do is I simply take some backgrounds and they're like various different types of ambiances and then just use volume graphing on it so that if there's a car by, it's like, whew, or if it's like the sound of the car is reflecting off of a building. Mm-hmm. So you just bring that sound up a little bit and out. So the Foley is very important. And at first for Rick, and I'm a stickler about Foley. Foley needs to be right for me. But it is interesting that it is really only until the last couple of years that I understand really how to get good Foley. So
tell us.
Getting in sync is first of all so important.
Sync, if it's out of sync, it doesn't sell. You don't believe it.
Right.
Sync is just a thing.
Right.
Yes.
So here I'm sort of getting off the subject. we could talk about Foley. We're talking about what are the things that Rick
for sure
likes about his films. Yeah, there are films. Each of his films maybe has some interesting effect sequences. Yes, I wish sometimes that there were some bigger things and more interesting sound design things. But when it comes down to trying something new and different, he's very open to it. And I did try that. And I don't know. I know that there's a couple people who have made comments to me about it because they've heard it. But when you're listening to Waking Life, you'll notice in the background, very faint, some shifting tones.
Okay.
And these are major tones. These are minor tones. But it sort of fits with the dialogue that's happening there. You sort of have to turn it up to listen to it. And all that is just some winds that I added some notches to make the harmonics for that chord. So, and that's a technique that I've used in a number of other films and used it to sort of enhance the music to Graham Reynolds' music in Scanner Darkly. I use that to enhance some of the sequences or do transitions into some of the sequences. If Scanner Darkly is an interesting film for the scramble suits, where the characters had to be you didn't know who was behind there, so you had to take their voice and change it so that you wouldn't know who the identity of that person was. So the audience doesn't know who it is until towards the end they take the suit off and they say, "Okay, they're one of the main characters that have." Well, that was an interesting challenge to do that. That took a number of weeks of experimentation.
So it was the original actor the whole time, and you were disguising the original.
Well, at first, I tried to process the voice.
Okay.
And Rick was very quick to point out that, and it's true, that with this, because there's so much of the people in the scramble suit when they're these weird voices, and first of all, it's sort of hard to understand. The audience just isn't going to accept that. Anyway, this is sort of in the future. It should be a little bit more sophisticated than that. But I did try one thing that was interesting. Still, it was not something that you want to keep hearing over and over again. I took 25 people saying the same thing and then used vocal line to line it all up. And then I used a compressor to switch back and forth between all those voices in just frames. And it made this, rather than playing them all at once, they're like switching back and forth. And it sort of fit the image, the scrambled image.
Yeah, that's way cool.
And but it was really cool. But it would have been, the audience would have gone, "Oh God, here's this again." So we had just brought in some other talent, and I processed their voice a little bit to make it sort of synthesized, and then it was a trick just trying to get just matching the performance of Keanu Reeves. And if you haven't seen the film, I won't say who the other person is. But
spoiler alert on a 17-year-old movie, or what was that, 2006, something like that?
Yeah, you're right. About then.
Yeah.
So
but fair.
So yeah, there have been some interesting challenges, and Rick's latest film, which the critics did not like very well, and have many people seen it? I don't know, but the sound in that is great. It's a nicely done, and the Foley is great. Man, this is where I've could start talking about Foley.
We can veer off into that. Although before we do, when you're doing tricky sound designy things, do you explain to the director kind of what's going on under the hood, or do you just let it play and see if the director is going to accept it or not?
For Rick, at this point, no, if it's going to be a really tricky thing, I'll still ask him, he'll come in to look at a temp mix, and here, I'll play this for him, and before going ahead and just doing the whole thing.
Right.
But,
I'm more talking about when you said you had this technique where you would vocal line a bunch of different
all of
takes.
that, yes. That was definitely working with, going back, playing the stuff. But
you're spelling out what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, okay.
I went back and forth with him a couple times. He came in.
Because there's two different trains of thoughts on that. One is if you tell the story of how you got to the sound, sometimes that pollutes the viewer's mind of what the sound is because they can see the magician behind pulling the strings. Versus sometimes telling the story of how you got to the sound helps sell the sound to the director who has to eventually approve it.
Right. We were both. I was trying to do something interesting, but the reality is that we were both of the same mind in terms of the audience.
Yeah.
This is just too weird, but here it is. It sounds interesting. He says, yeah, it's interesting, but I don't think it's going to work. So what I probably did was just say, look, let's just try processing the voice. So I did process the voice. Didn't do much of it, just a little bit, with someone else's doing it. Mm-hmm. So, and in that case, I remember now we had a whole bunch of different talent. And that was funny because we had some Texas accents, and some of them were pretty funny.
So before we get into the Foley thing, while we're talking about some of the movies that you've worked on, I have a question about Boyhood. Mm-hmm. How the hell did you handle ADR in this movie? Like, you had to have been doing it as you were going, right?
Right. Well, Rick and Sandra knew where they had problems. And
well, I guess maybe before we answer that, should we explain?
To back up, I was going to say, explain why that's a relevant question to people who haven't seen the movie.
Yeah, for people who aren't familiar with Boyhood, go watch it. But can you just explain why ADR would be an issue for Boyhood?
Okay,
the process of the film.
It was shot over 12 years, so about the same. Well, I think the scenes happen at different seasons, but Rick and his crew would shoot like a 10 or 20 minute, usually I think it was a 20-minute section of the story. And he had already, I think, written out most of it. He had an idea where it was going. But so this was, God, when did we?
This was 2013, did it?
Okay, so around 2001 is when he started shooting
every year for 12 years, he shot about 20 minutes of the film.
Right.
So the characters physically age, and the children go from children to young adults.
Right. So Sandra would cut each of those sequences, so she knew where the problems were. And one of them was they're at Pedernales Falls and swimming. And Ethan Andrus was the production mixer. He couldn't get close to them with the mics. They were in their swimsuits and they were jumping into the water. So, yes, they said we need to get that ADR. So Eller came in and I recorded him way back then. It was probably 2008 or 7 that I recorded him. Because his voice, I remember, his voice was changing. And we needed to get him before his voice changed.
Yeah, exactly.
So after that, subsequently, yes, we brought him in to do some things, but his voice had changed and had changed for those years that they were shooting, so there wasn't really a problem.
Okay.
Lorelei, Rick's daughter, who was also in that, there were some later scenes that we needed to pick up on that, but there really wasn't a huge amount of ADR in that film. There was more group material that we were.
But you had to stay on it because
we did.
There's no going back.
We did.
12 years to match the voice.
Exactly.
So there was definitely a level of organization and thought put into it. You weren't just brought in, when the picture was finished for cutting.
Exactly.
So when you were working on the film, like sound technology changed in those 12 years massively. Did it start as Niagara reels and end up as digital files?
No, it was actually all digital.
Well, okay.
I think Ethan, if I remember, Ethan started recording on DATs, and then he recorded on ADATs, and then he had I think an optical format that he was recording on, and then because he would give us the audio on DVDs, and then it was just regular stuff. So yes, it was over many different formats. ADAT was the big problem. But I had an ADAT deck that was working. So the one. And so we got it all set up with Pro Tools ready to record 8 tracks and put the tape in, and then got Pro Tools recording, push play, and just hoped it didn't eat the tape.
Did you know the scope of that project when you got started?
Yeah. Because when we started working on it, we had basically the whole film there. So
I like to imagine them showing up with one of those office boxes that people get when they're fired, just showing up with like every kind of possible recording media in the world and just being like, good luck.
It was sort of like that, but at least there wasn't an Nagra. There actually wasn't an Nagra involved.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it seems like in addition to like just the data and project management of that, contracts. How do you sign contracts that are gonna run that far out with like the actors and the production facilities that might or might not be around in a decade?
I guess.
Like that's
Rick will have to start talking to us about those things because he's working on this 20-year project.
Oh my God.
It's hyper ambitious just to.
So how are we going to be? He's only shooting it once every 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but that'll be interesting. On the other hand,
flexible, I guess.
is the technology going to change again?
Yeah.
Has
it's
it?
gonna.
Is it really?
Well,
Is it really?
32-bit was massive. Like when 32-bit came about, like I mean, it didn't really come about this year, but like once those recorders hit, I mean, that's a paradigm shift in the field recording space. So who knows?
Well, but it's a file. It's a file on a drive, and that's the big.
Yeah, that's fair. Everything's going to go to the cloud basically, and your computers are not even going to be in your office anymore.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So how did you and Richard meet originally? It was through that.
Well, it was Sandra.
The sister?
That direct link to Kim came from Tricia Linklater,
Okay.
who is now she works at Technicolor. She's one of their directors of post. Cool. The details of that. Okay, so we did
Chainsaw?
Kim Hinkle's film, and Sandra came and saw the mix. She would be there. She actually stopped by a number of times because she was the picture editor on that. And then we did a screening at the Paramount, and she just simply told Rick, she said, you know what? We could do the sound for Before Sunrise here in Austin. So that's how it happened.
You mentioned the Newton Boys that you did the Foley on, but was mixed in L.A.
Right. Now, that was a bigger film.
Yes.
That was a Fox picture.
So how is he? You've done more of his films than you haven't, but it does go back and forth a bit.
That one is different than the others because it was a Fox picture. There was much more money involved, and the studio didn't want the backwoods sound people working on it. They wanted to do it with the big boys. And so it was mixed at Skywalker. But luckily, Rick and Ann Walker McBay, who was his producer at the time, said, look, Tom can still do the Foley. And I actually ended up helping with the temp mixes too, where they would do the temp mix there and I'd fiddle with it and play it for Rick here in Austin.
So does Rick prefer to be working? Is it that he's wanting to work with you? Is he wanting to work in Austin? Is it both? Is it he doesn't want to work in L.A.? Can you put some words in his mouth?
Every film is so different, and sometimes I don't know if I'm ever going to work on another film of his again. I don't know what's going to happen. The bigger the film, the more complications there are. I think now that we are more established, that it's not as big a problem, but I've made it a lot easier for him. I mean, he's an amazing person, but he's only human. I mean, he's sometimes putting out a film a year now, and I've made it easier for him to not have to deal with going back and forth to Los Angeles. He can stay here, work on the next project. So, and he's told me that he says thanks. So, but there are other times where School of Rock. That money was coming from New York, and they wanted to do the sound out of there. I helped a little bit with the temp mixing. Also, the Orson Welles film, that money was coming from the UK, so that all the work was done out there.
That's a broader thing that we deal with, too. It's like, the money people have at least relationships, or at least they're reticent to send projects away from their production hubs, away from New York and L.A. And even if you've proven with your resume and your track record that you know what you're doing, sometimes it's hard to overcome just your zip code, and we run into that as well. How do you approach that?
You just go with the flow, and you just do the best you can.
Yeah.
Where'd You Go, Bernadette is an example, an Annapurna film, and it was a union picture. And I know there was a bunch of conflict. They wanted to do the finishing out there, the picture finishing. Rick Ginger Sledge, Rick's producer, and Sandra all insisted that they do the audio here. It would just make their life so much easier. So I think that's how it happened, that we actually ended up here. Annapurna wanted the film to be print mastered there in Los Angeles. So it worked out well. Tricia is a director over there at Technicolor, so we did the print mastering there. Mark Patterson helped us. So whatever for sound, just do the best you can.
Yeah.
Do good work. And
do good work. Sometimes you're not going to be able to control everything. Sometimes that's okay.
Yeah, that's
So
fair.
You just have to accept it.
So we're sitting in Soundcrafter's main mix room right now. And when we look at your mix position, there isn't a big board full of faders there.
Right.
So you like to mix with the mouse.
Well, I was talking about going with how Pro Tools developed, when they started adding things. So I'm an editor starting out, and I think of myself still as an editor. The mouse and the keyboard is what I'm used to. So, yes, I might use this. Yes, I could use a console.
He points at a fader.
But the console is just a big mouse anyway.
Yep.
So if you want to save some money, yes, we'll probably get a big console someday. But right now, to save some money, we don't need it yet. Glenn Eanes, who is one of our crew members, he has an S3, and he brings that in to work with. But and it's what I was talking about, Where'd You Go, Bernadette? When we took the film I've oftentimes had to take the film different places. So for some of Rick's films, we would do it locally here. Some of them went to Larry Blake's stage at Swelltone Labs in New Orleans. Some of them have gone to a number of other stages in Los Angeles. This time, I didn't want to go through this transition where they would take our template and reconfigure it, because it would take days to reconfigure. So Mark Patterson was very gracious and worked with us to not do anything. He just took our template, took it to the stage there, basically just opened it up and did the work. There was some things we added to it, like brought up the Foley a little bit. I was surprised that the Annapurna people were just talking about bringing up some backgrounds and some Foley. So those were all so there were some other fixes, but it was mostly around that line.
Yeah. That's a good transition into Foley. You have thoughts on what makes Foley sell.
Yes. Okay, so when I started working there out of CalArts, Dane and Greg Jacobs called me up. I hadn't even finished school, and they said, "Hey, we're working on this low-budget horror film. We need some help." And so at first, working as an assistant, but then I immediately, Dane decided, okay, he's going to move into his own place. So I actually helped him move equipment into his place that he had on. It was in the building with JDH Sound, which isn't there anymore. But he had called it Dane Tracks, and it was mostly his office and a bunch of rooms that had moviolas in them. So I just started doing the Foley, and I guess I was good at it. So that's where I got stuck. I got stuck doing Foley.
Now, doing the Foley as a performer,
No, as a supervisor.
As a supervisor.
I would, back then, the filmmaking process was much more complicated. So it would go on for sometimes months. So I would program the Foley, go sit on the Foley stage, supervise it, always tell the
When you
artist.
say program the Foley, what do you mean by that?
Just write out all the stuff on sheets. So it's like the
get the
footsteps
cue
are going
sheets
from
ready.
here to here for
spotting
this
it,
character.
yeah.
This prop is going from here to here.
Yep.
So
On actual paper, right?
on actual paper,
Yeah.
strips of paper.
Yeah.
So going to the stage and always saying, "Hey, we need it bigger footsteps." I remember it was the Bill and Ted's Bogus Adventure.
No, Bogus Journey.
Bogus Journey.
Yes.
Well, there was the second one.
Yeah, the second one.
Second one,
The
Bogus-
Big Adventure was the first one. Bogus Journey. is the
Bogus
second.
Journey, okay.
Don't mess with me with my Bill and Ted.
Okay. Well, that's the name thing I was telling you about. So why can't we get these footsteps bigger? We need them bigger, So we try all these different things. We try to make, we try to process it with hardware but little did we know. I mean, here it is now. It's so simple to get it bigger. Why didn't these Foley recordists know all of this?
What's the trick?
You're looking at me like, oh, what it is. All you need is just a room mic.
Yes.
Just, when you record
some space.
footsteps, you're not, when you hear a footstep, you don't have the mic down on the floor. Mm-hmm. Put it back, and then the body of that footstep can be there. And it certainly goes with hand pats and things like that because it's very tappy when you get close to the mic because the high frequencies just push through. So it's a combination of those two microphones.
Yeah. So you always cut with two mics? You cut it closer?
Yeah, now we always cut with two mics.
Yeah.
In fact, I could even do more.
And you like 416 and TLM 103?
We're using the Sennheisers, the 416.
Yeah.
Yes, and that.
And the TLM 103 is the
also
mic.
We use the Sheps there.
The Shep cement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is on my voice because I need the extra frequencies.
Yes, we thought that would be important.
Yeah. So for the new movie, Where'd You Go, Bernadette? The last half hour or so takes place in the Arctic. Mm-hmm. Did you commit to this film and go to the Antarctic and record ambiences yourself?
Justin Hennard, who is one of our crew members, has done the sound design on most of our later Richard Linklater films, and he contacted a field recordist who had been there to Antarctica. He sold us a whole bunch of his sounds.
Nice.
Yeah.
The penguins came from actually, I think,
New York Zoo.
Mark Mangini's recordings of Mr. Popper's penguins because we needed like a Gentoo. What is the name of the penguin? The Gentoo penguin, which is
the one with the eyebrows.
Well, it has a certain type of sound to it. And those penguins, actually, I don't think there are, well, I don't know where, but a lot of the shooting for the film was in Greenland.
Yeah.
The Antarctic pictures were just sort of place shots that the cinematographer went and picked up. Those sequences, a lot of them are combined shots.
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot of CGI in that. Mm-hmm. There's a scene with Billy Crudup and the daughter.
On the
father and daughter. And well, no, they were actually sitting on the rocks.
Penguins in the
That was actually shot in a studio. Mm-hmm. But they were using shots from Antarctica there. So those penguins came from Antarctica.
Nice.
So I don't know the details of all of that. but we got it to work with those backgrounds.
Yeah.
So I've been talking to some of your crew, and they have told me that you are a perfectionist in a positive way. That a word can sometimes be a negative, but and that you have a unique system of giving feedback to them after you've mixed with Post-it notes. Can you explain that to me?
I also, in my phone, have pages of notes, like when I'm working or mixing an editor's work, I'll write down some suggestions and then feed that to them. Some of them I haven't talked to them about in years. But yes, I mean, when you're mixing something and okay, this could have been done better, yes, I'll tell them. And I think that helps. Doesn't that help?
Definitely helps.
I mean, yeah. If you want to get better, you need people that are evaluating your work and giving feedback, right?
Yeah.
It's something that I think is getting lost a bit because, as we were mentioning earlier, a lot of times in mixes, people aren't even there anymore.
Yep.
And they've moved on to a different project, and you have no idea if your edit worked well or not.
Right.
And it's, I think it's something that we should, as a industry, try and continue doing more, is getting that feedback loop happening because that's how you learn.
Yeah, so I think that's an important, you were talking about groups. That's an important thing we have here as a group when we can share our feelings about other people's works. And we all sort of know where we stand. Some of us are much better than others in terms of cutting or mixing. There are certain things that I'm just not as good. Wayne Bell, who's one of our crew members, he's an incredible dialogue editor, very fastidious with detail and getting the EQ just right. Yes, I am too, but not quite as much as he is.
Are you structured with how you give that feedback? Is it like as soon as you complete something, you give this over there and then you give feedback back down the line? Or
I'll tell them immediately or the next day or when I remember. I don't think, on Bernadette, we've been working, this crew has been working for so many years that I haven't really given them many comments that I remember recently.
So it's working.
I guess it's working.
And what, like, how do you approach it? Is it verbal? Are you writing things down, or
well, it's coming from my
setting
notes.
It up?
Yes, because I'm very particular about footsteps. At first I would tell them, look, we need to get this better. And I'll show them, this is what I did. I lined this up here. You can hear the production there. It's there. Just line that footstep to the production, then you won't hear it doubling. Mm-hmm. So other times if I'm mixing it, I'll just move them. Sometimes I'll just move them and it's fine. I'm not going to even tell them. It's just sometimes, when I'm doing work, sometimes I'll miss stuff. On the other hand, you also have to look at the bigger picture. How important is that to the film to get that perfect? Well, sometimes it may not be important to the film, but it may be important to me because I'll just think about it. It's like I wanted to get that fixed, and I always regret not fixing it. And every time I see the film, which is not that often, but there's that problem that I should have fixed. So
and that goes back to your days as a Foley supervisor, then.
Yeah. Oh, it's thinking about the Foley from those like Drugstore Cowboy, which is an interesting sound design film. But the Foley is just, it's just bad. It's just
So what makes Foley bad in your eyes? Like, what mistakes do people make?
It was not a big budget film, and the mixers didn't have a huge amount of time. They're moving fast, so they aren't adding the reverb that it needs. And of course, they're dealing with Foley that wasn't recorded as well as we can do now. Yeah. It just stuck out as being Foley, and I think a lot of filmmakers are used to that now. Rick, here we are working on Bernadette, and Rick is saying, bring the Foley in more because it works. It sounds real. So it's all those techniques, the two mics, getting the reverb right, the cutting of it, being able to match the wood footsteps and the character of the wood into the production. So when the characters are walking through the house, you're hearing some of the production, and then it shifts over to the Foley, but it's seamless. How do you get that? Okay, there's a lot of EQ involved. Just the reverb, just trying to get that. It's experience.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And you have a nice front end as far as like more than just the mic, your pre's and the rest of your input path for the Foley is kind of specific to that task.
And here we have great people helping with the Foley. First of all, Susan Fitzsimon, who is our Foley artist here and moved to Austin in about Scanner Darkly time, which is 2007, 2006. And then Glenn Eanes, he has been doing the recording of the Foley on a couple of the last films. We all do various jobs here. It's not like, okay, that's the other thing. Glenn is mixing all these television shows that's another story that we're doing. He's doing the Foley, he's supervising other projects. He's got the technique down with the two mics.
Yeah.
And, it's all of us working together to perfect that. Susan is so important to the Foley. Without her, it wouldn't happen. If you can build a Foley stage, but unless you have a good Foley artist.
Yep.
And she, we can't keep her working as a Foley artist all year. So she's editing and mixing, but she's also having to go back to Los Angeles to record Foley there too. And what we find is that there's, besides Rick's films, yes, we do Foley for films here and there. But it's not a full Foley job. It's not a foreign mix because these lower budget films just don't have the money to go to a full foreign mix.
One other thing that you kind of brought up right then, and it's something that we experience as well, that's unique from the LA system, is that we do have to wear multiple hats. And so as we go about the tasks of editing and mixing, that can help inform the way that we do things like record Foley and spot what needs to go down and all of that.
Right.
I've definitely found that well. I feel very grateful, actually, that I get to wear multiple hats and have the different things, the different disciplines inform one another within the context of a team.
Right.
Yeah.
Other times it's a little hard. Especially when first moving here, you're dealing with transferring onto an ADAT at the same time that you're not getting much sleep.
Yeah.
For weeks on end. It's much easier now. It's great to have a crew. It's great to have a facility like this. There are still things that I'm doing which I'm happy to finally be through, which is getting the design of this place done. So there are things that I'm having to do. One of our acoustic technicians here, our only acoustic technician here in town, passed away last year in a tragic accident, Mark Genfin, and he would come in here and calibrate the speakers. Well, I sort of knew how to do that, but I really relied on him. This room was calibrated by Dolby, but all these other rooms that we have, Mark would do.
Mark was the guy locally that kind of designed and erected a lot of the facilities in this part of the world.
So I'm doing that now, and I'm getting better at it. It's so important to have that, like even that little room there, match this larger room.
What is your favorite Linklater film? Either from the work you put into it or just from watching it?
From watching it, I think when I start working on a film, I have to rely on that first moment when you watch it, because then you become so jaded about what it is. And
you're not the first to tell us that.
Yeah. Well, Boyhood was interesting because actually you were talking about us starting. On that film, we started working on the reel 1 and then reel 2. Sandra hadn't finished actually cutting the later reels or tweaking it, so we didn't get the whole thing. But Before Sunset, the second of the Before series, made a huge impression on me. I remember going over to Sandra's editing room and watching that. It's like, wow, this emotionally affected me. And so I held on to that. You have to hold on to those moments while you're working on the film. Whereas films like Where'd You Go, Bernadette, I don't know what happened to that film. That film went through 13 temp mixes, and it started out very long, almost 3 hours, and I liked it. I actually liked it. I liked it better than the shorter version. But everyone would say at the test screenings, they said it was too long. So Anna Perna kept forcing Rick and Sandra and Ginger to keep cutting it down. And I'd be happy to help Rick if you wanted to
do a director's cut.
Because we actually did the Foley for the longer version. We did. The film is about a character that not many, that the audience doesn't like her as much, and I think what's missing are some of those scenes where you feel sorry for her. So
interesting.
It's an interesting film because it's normally. It wasn't panned by critics, but it wasn't adored by critics.
Yeah.
But the audience scores, when you look at like Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb, they're quite a bit higher. Which normally that happens for like a horror film or some kind of action film. The critics are like whatever, but in those genre type films, the audiences still love it. For a film of its type, that's very rare for the critics to think it's a lower score than the audience, because the audience quite liked it. Everyone who did take the time to go see it was a fan. Well, thank you very much for talking to us and letting us in your studio today. This is a wonderful place to hang out and talk to you.
Well, thank you very much.
Hey everybody, this is Tim. Thanks for listening to that episode. I want to send a big thanks out to Chris Zott for editing this episode. Chris is a Foley artist and owner of Little Hook Sound, a Foley stage in the heart of the Canadian prairies. His social media handles for everything are @Chris Zott. That's Chris, SZOTT. Chris is the only person who sent Tonebenders a holiday greeting card this past year, and it was a really funny one. So thanks for helping us out, Chris, and thanks for that Christmas card. This episode with Tom was a really fun one to record because René and I met for the first time in person about 8 minutes before we started recording that episode. So it was really cool to finally meet René, to hang out with Tom, who's one of my kind of sound heroes unto himself. It was a super fun day that day. So stay tuned for more episodes from the trip René and I took to Austin. We interviewed some really great people while we were there. and we'll be sending those episodes out over the next few months. Austin is one of my favorite places in the world. I loved it there. We got some great stuff coming for you. Have a great day.
Tonebenders is produced by Timothy Muirhead, René Coronado, and Teresa Morrow. Theme music is by Mark Strait. Send your emails to info@tonebenderspodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter via @thetonebenders and join Tonebenders Podcast on Facebook. Support this podcast. You can use our links when you shop at Amazon or B&H, or leave us a tip. Just go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click the support button.